Hi, Aaron. This is an apologetical argument I wrote for you. It is called For Love. I am reading it, and it's very long, and I don't read out loud very well, so bear with me. And in any case, here goes. Aldous Huxley said, "The right to the pursuit of happiness is just the right to disillusionment, phrased another way." He said, "The luminous ceiling toward which we raise our longing eyes becomes, when we have climbed to the next floor, a stretch of disregarded linoleum beneath our feet." Does it not seem that everything in our lives, whether it is what we do, what we own, or who we are, falls just short of being satisfying? We are constantly looking for more, and Huxley was not writing about Western materialism so much as he was writing about the restless soul of humanity and our search for meaning. We wish our lives and our relationships could be more meaningful. We wish our jobs could be more satisfying. We wish our things could be a little nicer. We wish we ourselves could be a little bit more confident or sexy, outgoing, discreet, quiet, talkative, any way in which we are not. We wish that we could be more. And when we get what we want, it's never too long before this too becomes dissatisfying in context of the next inch we could travel in any given direction. It's as if the good that we experience is never good enough, and everything that we seek to fulfill us never fills us up. Life gives us the impression that it should be sufficient to fill our desires, for how should we desire to be fulfilled if it is not from the existence that creates these very desires in us? And yet, it is in the fulfillment of our desires that exposes in our hearts that particular quality of life to be insufficient to adequately fulfill us through desire in a way that quenches, if only in the most distant parts of our heart, the lingering sense of dissatisfaction. In other words, it is in getting what we want that we realize what we want is not what we need. It is in the very process of achieving what we desire that we discover in ourselves something that we need that exists apart from what we want. Man's compensation for this phenomenon is expressed in an inexhaustible amount of philosophies and religions and self-help seminars, all of which just determine for a man which part of the ocean he wishes to drown in. Western philosophy teaches that we determine the value of our lives. We write the script that either justifies us with success and self-affirmation or leaves us beaten and bruised, lying in the dust, wondering how it all happened so quickly. We have divided life into small, achievable goals that are visible to us, by which we can measure the success of our lives. It is a certain kind of job, a certain kind of family, a certain kind of influence, a certain kind of status. Most people give so much to get what they have. Before they know it, when they finally begin to think that they have acquired what it is they are looking for, they realize that they have long ago given up the part of themselves that knew how to appreciate such things. What was once the pursuit of a desire becomes a compulsion that we cannot separate ourselves from. Nevertheless, our culture continues to define itself by saying, "I have this, therefore my life has value." And if we achieve enough of what we have all collectively decided has value, then perhaps we can drown out the voice inside of us that insists that we do not. Whether it is a life of short-term goals we always have to be accomplishing, or long-term goals we are always working for, but never achieve, it is all designed to keep our heads down and our feet moving forward. For if we ever decided to stop and think about the futility and the absurdity of the ways in which we define our lives, we would be met with the very uncertainty and despair we live our entire lives attempting to avoid acknowledging. But Eastern philosophy is no better. Consider Buddhism, for example. It is the idea that the very faculty in us that reveals to us the undesirable quality of disillusionment, our desire for good things, is itself a delusion. Buddha's advice to the world is that if we cannot stop from producing rotten fruit, then we should stop from planting seeds. Buddhism's answer to the problem of disillusionment is to starve the population of hope by attempting to separate people from their desire, and through this treacherous doctrine, to somehow engage in us the desire to do what is good without having to call it a desire. We cannot address existential issues by denying the terms of existence. We cannot create new desires by denying desire itself. It is like trying to keep my car from overheating by disassembling the engine. Yes, it no longer overheats, but neither will it run. If Western philosophy overindulges the appetite of the individual, Eastern philosophy robs him of his identity altogether. Thus, both are a reciprocal inversion of the other, two sides of the same coin, and all of man's ideas concerning philosophy and religion lay on a spectrum that run between these two concepts, and no matter to what degree our own ideas reflect the integration of either one, they are all inadequate to metaphysically satisfy the condition of man's existence. I remember the first time that I watched the movie The Notebook was with you. I remember lying on our couch together, and by the end of the movie you were crying, and when I asked you why you were crying, you said to me this. You said, "I will never have that." You were lamenting your lack of true love with your lover in your arms. And though I did not display it to you at the time, I was heartbroken. But not because what you said was untrue, but because I understood exactly what you meant, and I knew it to be true. I was not giving you meaningful love, and if we were to remain together, you would always have to settle for a lesser version of the love you were hoping for. Now, I am not saying that The Notebook is a pure exposition of meaningful love. It is an example illustrating the reality that we all have an idea in our minds, but more importantly, in our hearts, of love and virtue. But what we imagine these qualities to be when we desire them never seems to live up to our expectations in our experience with them. It's as if something is lost in translation from the meaning they retain in our hearts and their practical expression in our lives. And so we write stories about faithful virtue, attainable joy, and of course, true love, of which The Notebook is a great example, but ultimately, these are just reflections of what we hope for in our hearts. And when we find out that our dreams are only just dreams, we become tragically disillusioned with life. It is at this point that we become set on a road that works either to fill our lives up with a bunch of materialistic junk and philosophical rhetoric, or we claim that the things that we thought we wanted never really existed to begin with, and in one way or another, we give up wanting them. Now, to be fair, I confess I had significant issues keeping me from even approaching the type of love that I would have wanted to give you, but that is exactly the point. Love is found in the giving, not the receiving, the having, or the taking. We cannot find love, buy it, or manufacture it for ourselves. It can only be given by those who are willing to give it. And the more able and willing a person is to love others, the more virtuous we consider that person to be. That is why we call a morality that expresses itself in love virtue, because virtue only means the worth of a thing. The true definition of virtue indicates the qualities that constitute the worth of something. That is why love is considered the pinnacle virtue, because love is only found when it is given, and when we give it, we are expressing how much someone is worth to us, or how valuable they are. It is for love that we live, and every person lives in search of the fulfillment that comes only when we are truly loved. Because it is only when we are truly loved that we truly believe that we have value. And when we can truly believe that we have value, we are able to experience true joy. The problem with this situation lay in the condition of every person, whether they have people helping them or not, having to fight for their own survival, filling their own needs and pursuing their own desires, of which the desire to give love and the need to be loved are included. How are we to love each other when our existence requires us to first be preoccupied with our own survival and to be responsible for the quality of our own life by filling our own desires? If we take the concept of selfless virtue expressed in our existence to the absurd end in which we lived our lives entirely for the sake of others, we would have nothing of our own to give as means to be selfless, because by being selfless we would have nothing, we would be nothing, and therefore we could give nothing. Even if we were a completely dependent slave to another, it would still require another selfish desire to serve if we were to give our lives to serve it. If we all made ourselves dependent slaves, if it were everyone's will to serve the will of another, then there would be no singular will to be served, thus putting all of humanity at a stalemate. For if we are to love others, we must first at least establish the means of our own survival so that we may exist to love them. And if we abandon our own desires completely, there would be no practical method in which to love others or to be loved in return. There has to be a certain amount of selfish desire indulged in order for the kind of love we are able to give to exist. In other words, in our existence, without selfishness, there would be no existence. And when selfishness exists, love does not. This is in no way an exhaustive argument, but I do think it necessary to add this side note. When we take for ourselves in order to give to others, it is still called love. For when we work for what we have, we can appropriately say that we are giving what we value for whom we value. But anything that we take for ourselves, we still take from the hands of others, if only an opportunity to acquire for themselves the means to love the people in their own lives. Thus, in this way, a new level of selfishness is created by an existence that requires us to labor for our own survival. Every time we attempt to eradicate selfishness in our existence, we either work to eradicate our own existence, or we create a new level of selfishness existing in a different way. If we are not competing over resources to fill our own selfish desires, then we are competing for the resources to love the people in our own lives, because by the very definition of the love we claim, we would do anything for them, and so we are justified in doing whatever we must to take care of them. In either situation, a little selfishness is required to make the world go round. Where selfishness exists, love does not. Any time we take from each other, no matter how justified it may seem, we are acting apart from the virtue of love. The absence of love, since it is the pinnacle of virtue, is corruption, however slight it may seem, in the virtue that constitutes the love that we give. If what is worth most in our existence decreases in value, then every man's existence, which is designed to serve this value and thus to receive value from it, also decreases in value. It is this decrease in the value of mankind, because of the selfishness that is now required of us to sustain our own lives by our own efforts, that we sense so strongly in our hearts. And what sends us out scrambling in the world to justify ourselves, compensating for the value that we need, but so profoundly lack. It is in this existential problem, in the human condition, that mankind's faith in God is based. God is not a fill-in-the-blank for all the things in life that men do not understand. Genuine faith in God comes by man's desire to care for others, because he knows it is only in abandoning his own desires that he finds he can truly love those he cares about. In order to abandon our own desires without eradicating our own existence, we must believe that there is a God who exists to fulfill them for us, albeit in his own way, if we live the way he has designed us to live, which is for others, or for love. It is only upon these terms, the ones centered in God's power, that we are able to entertain the true nature of love. It is death that requires our selfish attention to our own survival and inhibits us, with this unavoidable selfishness, from giving the love that we long to give, so that we may all have the value we long to have. We surrender to the supernatural giver of life, God, the right to sustain our own lives, so that we may have the privilege to use the small amount of time that we do have in pursuit of what truly gives life value, love. It is also only because of death that man is even capable of recognizing life to have value, since death makes life a limited commodity and therefore a precious, valued resource. Since we perceive in this way life to have value, we look for virtue, or the qualities that give value, in it. And many of us, after sifting through all the junk, begin to realize that virtue of the heart and of the soul is of much more value than anything we can hold in our hands or spout from our self-righteous mouths. But in pursuing love, With our selfish existence, we discover that we are unable to give the love that we want to give. Therefore, just as it is in the fulfillment of our desires that exposes our desires' inadequacy to properly fulfill us, so it is in the pursuit of love that exposes our inability to give true love that gives value to life, and we search for God to make all our crooked paths straight. It is from this way that we are designed to perceive the possible value inherent in life that we believe God to be good, since He is the missing piece in the equation that allows us to gain value through love in this way. God gives value to all things, being the ultimate expression of love and the substance of virtue, if only because He sustains us to live in a way that provides the greatest value for us. If it is by His love that we are sustained to give love to each other, then it is by His virtue that we accomplish this task, since true virtue is the source of true love. If our virtue has been corrupted with selfishness and we are a product of Him, then ultimately we have corrupted His virtue that He has bestowed on us to give love. We must question what occurred to disrupt this divinely ordained equation and produce the death and selfishness from which our love now suffers violence. But an existence based on value must also be based on choice. For the value that comes by virtue does so by free will. In order to value something, we must choose it from an alternative. This is why it is called valuing. By evaluating a choice, we value one option over another by preferring it to the other. We communicate what we value by the choices that we make, and if any force compels us to choose one way or another, we cannot say that our choice is the product of our own preference, and therefore not an expression of value. Therefore, if our virtue became flawed, it was due to a choice that was made to value a course of action that was incongruous with God's value. Since we are a product of His value, it is His virtue, the substance of His value, that defines our life. To deny His value by corrupting His virtue is to deny life itself, and where life is denied, death advances. Therefore, if we are to be restored to His value, then we must value Him by choosing Him from a set of alternatives we have a free will to choose from. This implies two things about our choice. One, just because there is more than one alternative does not mean there is more than one universal answer. Two, since choice is a crucial variable in this function, and every man must choose for himself and not be compelled by any force greater than himself, then the truth cannot be undoubtedly apparent. This means that whatever a man may choose, this choice is made on a certain amount of faith. The idea that God, being the source of value, would condone His corrupted value in us is absurd. For God to value what does not have value is the same as devaluing His own value. And if He is the answer to our existence in this way due to the purity of His value, He will not do that, just as enabling the behavior of a drug addict is devaluing to the lives of those involved in his life. A drug addict cannot be helped until he realizes that his actions are full of death. And to think that man is capable of achieving true virtue from his fundamentally flawed state is like saying it is possible for an alcoholic to achieve happiness through the regular consumption of alcohol. We both know that this is not true. This cannot happen. We must realize that the selfishness that keeps us from attaining true value through virtuous love is full of death. And death is like God's intervention. It is death that reveals this selfishness in us and invalidates all of our attempts to justify ourselves. Because no matter how successful a person is, no matter how good and virtuous they may seem, despite the wisdom of their wise decisions or the destruction of their foolish ones, we all die the same as one another, no matter how we choose to live. If, as I said before, every man must first be selfish so that he may be selfless. Then we must value ourselves first before we may value others. If our ability to value others comes from the product of valuing ourselves, then under no circumstances would our value for others ever be greater than our value for ourselves. In this way, no man can give true value if he is existentially unable to prefer another before himself. How can we call love for others love, or value for others value, if it is never greater than that which we claim for ourselves? If we continued this life indefinitely, without any end, then the pervasiveness of our selfishness would extinguish any concept of love altogether, and thus any notion of value in life. It is only because of the ultimate consequence of life that we all suffer, death, that mankind is able to see in himself both the value in life that makes life worth the living, and his inability to achieve it. It is through death that we see ourselves as existentially incongruous with life, because ultimately death is the great extinguisher of life, and thus the great harmonizer of evil. Fortunately, that which is designed for evil, God uses for good. Just as it is through death that we are able to see ourselves as fundamentally flawed in life, it is also through death that we are able to recognize the one who gives life by conquering death. If Jesus Christ were just another man who expressed his own ideas of the virtue that we all seek, then he would have no more a right to be heard than anyone who proclaims his own personal interpretation of the truth. As finite beings with limited understanding, no man is in any better of a position to know truth than any other man. This premise is inherent in what makes us equal as human beings. But truth is not up to us, just as it is not up to us to decide whether or not to repeal the law of gravity. As men who are existentially bound to selfishness because of death, we must admit that there is a truth we can see exists, but we all seem to have lost the knowledge of that truth. This is why it is every man's propensity to define truth in his own way, and because we still believe ourselves to be equal, we have a tendency to believe truth to be subjective, since no man has the authority to disprove any other man in this regard. Without Jesus Christ, I would emphatically agree that this is the case. But then again, without Jesus Christ, truth would be much different. Christians do not follow Jesus Christ because he told us what was good and we believed him. That is not the point of the story of the gospel. Christians follow Jesus because he resurrected from the dead. He has defeated the only obstacle to which every man without exception will fall, and therefore established himself as no man at all. And in his divine nature he retains a particular authority to declare to the world what truly constitutes the virtue that we lack and the value that we seek. When we say that God is an existential necessity for us to attempt to abandon our selfishness, it is only through Jesus Christ that we are able to call upon God so that he may sustain us in a way that allows us to do so. Like I said earlier, if God valued mankind in his corrupted virtue, then he would be devaluing his own value. But if Jesus Christ, who himself was not corrupted, which for argument's sake, please allow this premise, because it is involved in the unique message of the gospel, and if we dismiss this premise, then we have to dismiss everything I said before it. So for argument's sake, allow it, please. If Jesus Christ, who himself was not corrupted, died on our behalf, then we benefit from this in two ways. One, he died the death we deserve, and the death that is necessary to eradicate the corrupted virtue of God. Therefore, for those who identify with Christ by faith, we can expect to overcome death, since death has already been endured on our account. This does not mean that our bodies do not die. It means just as Christ has been resurrected, and thus given proof of God's willingness to resurrect, we can expect to be resurrected as well. 2. By dying on our behalf, forsaking the pursuit of every desire that comes with living life, and giving his life for us in this regard, he has exemplified the very perfection of virtue that we have lost the knowledge of, and by identifying with Christ, we are uniting ourselves by association to the perfection of virtue, and therefore allowing God to sustain us once again with his power in a way that doesn't condone our corruption, but acknowledges Christ's perfection and his sacrifice on our behalf, so that we are free to value others through virtuous love, and thus receive value from this life which was always meant to be lived for love. This does not mean that Christians are perfect. We are still corrupted, just as every man is corrupted. It means that through Christ's perfection, there is no more reason for animosity between Christians and their Creator, and we are forgiven for all things, and now seek to learn virtue from the God who sustains us with his own virtue. Now, we are finite beings in a world that exceeds us by both space and time. For this reason, we are unable to acquire any knowledge apart from faith. Even a materialistic and atheistic worldview where nothing exists other than what one can see and what he can lay his hands on is dependent upon the faith of a man to believe something he cannot fully know. He only believes what he cannot know based on how he chooses to interpret what he can know, which, contrary to modern and popular belief, is extraordinarily limited by his own existence. How can we contrive truth from the midst of such darkness? All men must be told knowledge in life that they would otherwise lack the resources to gain for themselves. And all men trust the authority of those who are in a position to know more than them, and likewise these men trust others for knowledge as well. This is how we benefit from each other and become civilized through living a life of common knowledge. Unfortunately, in order for knowledge to be common among us, everyone must be moving in the same direction, and by definition of a world being full of selfishness, everyone is moving in his own direction. Trusting Jesus Christ because of his unique authority is no different than the manner in which we acquire any other knowledge in our lives. Faith is trusting in authority. Existence is inextricable from the implementation of our faith to function. My point in this context is that all metaphysical arguments are rhetorically refutable, even if it is based on the truth. There is no argument that will stand up to the cynical examination of a man who has not committed himself to anything. So discrediting an argument is not necessarily saying it is not true. Remember that. I leave these things to your capable mind to consider, and I hope you do so with an open mind. A true open mind does not preclude any possibility in its search for the truth. However, knowing the truth is to exclude all other possibilities as false. I have found this relationship to be reliable between a system of belief and the truth. It does not matter what we choose to believe so much as it matters what is actually true. But what is true only matters if you believe it to be so. I apologize that I can't be more personal in these videos, and there's only 2, but there may be more. But what I'm talking about, what I'm writing about, is personal enough. And if we ever see each other or talk to each other again, we'll get personal then. And if somehow you find this video in the next 6 days, Merry Christmas.